All right, so get ready because today we're doing a deep dive on boundaries. Something we could all probably use a little help with, especially in all of this craziness that VR is. We found this therapist guide to setting boundaries, and
Huh?
uh, honestly, it's just packed with wisdom that applies to real life too. I mean, think about it. You're in some VR social space and someone's getting a little too close for comfort. Maybe they're trying to push you into a conversation you really don't want to have. How do you deal with that gracefully without just like disappearing into thin air? Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and it seems to be getting more and more relevant. These lines between virtual and real are getting blurrier and blurrier every day.
Totally. And this guy jumps right into why setting boundaries can sometimes feel like,
Mhm.
you know, trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops.
Well, what's interesting is that so many people have a hard time setting boundaries, and it's because they have this deep-seated need to please other people or avoid conflict. It's almost like we're hardwired to look for validation, and we worry about rocking the boat.
Oh, for sure. I've totally been there. It's like this internal alarm bell goes off. Like, don't be rude, don't make things awkward.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're agreeing to do things you really don't want to do.
Exactly. And it can be even more intense in VR because there's that added layer of anonymity. So it's like
Sure.
all the usual social rules get thrown out the window, and people feel like they can push boundaries in ways they might not in person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like you're expected to be okay with virtual hugs from random strangers or
Mhm.
getting roped into some crazy role-playing scenario that you never signed up for.
Yeah, and this is where self-awareness is so important. The therapist in this guide really emphasizes that understanding your own comfort zone is like the foundation for setting healthy boundaries.
Okay, so self-awareness check time. What are some things that instantly make you hit that nope button in VR? For me, it's those really crowded virtual parties where everyone's talking over each other. I just can't deal with the chaos, even if it's just avatars.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. I'm more of an introvert myself, so those big, overwhelming social gatherings are a definite no-go for me, too. And you brought up a good point. This guide also talks about specific scenarios like unwanted flirting or being pressured to talk about things that make you uncomfortable.
Right. It's like just because you're in a virtual world, it doesn't mean you've suddenly signed up for a dating app or a therapy session.
Exactly. It's all about respecting your own preferences and realizing that what one person finds comfortable might be totally off limits for someone else. There's no right or wrong answer here.
Okay, so let's say you've done some soul searching and you've figured out your boundaries. How do you actually communicate them without turning into like a virtual jerk? I mean, just shouting, "No way, Jose," every 5 seconds doesn't exactly make you seem approachable.
You've hit on a really important point. The therapist suggests having a few go-to phrases ready to go so you can clearly and politely communicate your boundaries. It's like having a cheat sheet for those awkward moments when your mind goes blank.
Oh, I am all about cheat sheets. What are
Yeah.
some examples?
Well, for example, if someone's getting a little too flirty, you could say something like, "Hey, I'm just here to relax and chat. I'm not really looking for that kind of connection." Or if someone's trying to pressure you into doing something you're not into, you could say, "Thanks for the invite, but I'm going to sit this one out."
I like that. It's direct, but not dismissive. You're acknowledging the other person while still sticking to your boundaries. But what about those times when someone just doesn't take the hint? Some people are like virtual bulldozers.
Yeah, you're right, it happens. And that's where mastering the art of saying no comes in. It can be tough, especially if you tend to be a people pleaser. But remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries.
Oh, it's a good reminder. I always feel like I have to come up with some big excuse when really a simple no should be enough.
Exactly. And this guide gives some great strategies for actually getting comfortable saying no. It starts with practicing in low-stakes situations. Maybe you politely decline a virtual high five or suggest watching a different video than the one they're trying to make you watch.
Okay, I see what you're getting at. Baby steps. You're
Yeah.
building those no muscles without jumping straight into confrontation.
Exactly. You're slowly shifting your mindset from always putting other people's needs first to honoring your own needs. It's a powerful shift, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Even just thinking about this, it's making me realize how often I prioritize other people's comfort over my own. Not just in VR, but in real life too. It's like this default setting I need to change.
Yeah, you've hit on a key point. We often bring these patterns from real life into our virtual interactions.
So figuring out those patterns and understanding why we struggle to say no, That's a big part of this whole boundary setting journey, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. And speaking of journeys, we're just getting started. Stay tuned because in part two, we're going to talk about some VR specific strategies for setting boundaries. And we'll uncover some surprising benefits that might even spill over into your real life.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we jumped into the VR specific stuff, we were talking about how important it is to understand those patterns that make us say yes when we really want to say no.
Mm.
Figuring that out is like the key to taking back our power to set boundaries.
It's so true. It's like we need to just hit pause for a second and become aware of those moments when we're about to give in to pressure or that need to please people.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing those moments
Mhm.
and making a choice to act in a way that honors our own needs.
And I guess that's where the cost of not setting boundaries comes in. It can't be healthy to always put everyone else's comfort first.
You're absolutely right. The therapist in this guide says that if we keep neglecting our own needs, it can lead to resentment, burnout, and even damage our self-worth. Wow, that's pretty serious. It's like we're chipping away at ourselves every time we say yes when we mean no. It makes me think about all those times I felt drained and resentful after agreeing to do things I didn't want to do, both in VR and in real life.
Yeah, that's a really common experience. We might think we're being nice or helpful, but really we're often sacrificing our own well-being.
So how do we break free from this cycle? It can't be easy to change years of ingrained patterns.
It's definitely a process, but this guide has some really powerful strategies. One of the most important is taking ownership of our boundaries. It's realizing that it's our job to communicate our needs clearly, not expecting others to read our minds or magically know what we're thinking.
Right, that makes sense. It's like we're taking charge and saying, this is what I'm okay with and this is what I'm not okay with. But I have to admit that feels a little intimidating,
Hmm.
especially if you're used to be more passive or accommodating.
I totally understand that feeling. It can be a big change for a lot of people. But remember, setting boundaries is a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice.
So we need to treat it like a muscle that needs to be strengthened over time.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become in asserting your needs. And the rewards can be amazing.
Speaking of rewards, I'm really curious about those VR-specific strategies we talked about earlier. It seems strange that something as unreal as VR could actually help us set better boundaries in real life.
You might be surprised. What's cool about VR is that it gives you this unique space to experiment with boundary setting. It's safe and controlled. It's almost like a training simulator for those tough social interactions.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about these VR boundary setting superpowers.
Well, one of the best strategies in VR is to set expectations early. This means being upfront about what you're comfortable with right from the start. For example, if you join a VR space and you're not interested in flirting, you could casually say something like, just so you know, I'm here to chat and have fun, not really looking for anything romantic.
I see what you mean. It's like laying down the ground rules before things even get going. But isn't that a little awkward? I don't want to come off as uptight or closed off.
I get it. It can feel a bit weird at first, especially if you're not used to being so direct. But think of it this way. By being upfront, you're actually saving yourself and the other person from potential discomfort later on.
Hmm, that's a good point. It's like setting those clear boundaries right away can actually make interactions more authentic and enjoyable.
Exactly. And this approach works really well in VR because people often think that anything goes in these virtual worlds.
Right. It's like we forget that there are real people behind those avatars, and everyone has their own comfort levels and boundaries.
Exactly. So by setting those expectations early, you're not only respecting your own boundaries, but you're also showing others how to behave respectfully.
Okay, I'm getting this clear. Communication is key. But what about when someone just doesn't respect your boundaries, even after you've told them what they are?
Yeah, that's when things can get a little tricky. But remember, you still have options. A lot of VR platforms have features that let you control your interactions. You might be able to block someone, mute them, or even report them to the moderators.
That's good to know. It's like having a virtual bouncer you can call on.
Yeah.
You can create your own safe space, even in a crowded virtual world.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your experience and not letting others dictate how comfortable you feel.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on VR. It's
Right.
like this amazing tool for practicing important social skills, but in a way that's less scary than real life.
You got it. VR can be a fantastic training ground for building confidence and assertiveness. And the best part is that these skills can be used in real life too. The more you practice setting boundaries in VR, the more comfortable you'll be doing it in person.
I love that. It's like VR is giving us this superpower to improve our communication skills and create healthier relationships, both online and offline.
You're catching on quick. And the beauty of VR is that it gives you a safe space to experiment, to find what works best for you. You can try different phrases, practice saying no in different situations, and even try using those VR features to manage your interactions.
This is blowing my mind. I never thought of VR as a tool for personal growth, but it makes so much sense. It's like you're practicing essential life skills in a low-stakes environment, where it doesn't matter as much if you make a mistake.
Exactly. And this practice can have a real impact on your real life. The confidence you build in VR can carry over into everyday situations and make you more assertive and empowered in setting boundaries.
I'm already thinking about how I can use these VR strategies in real life. It's like a whole new world of possibilities. But I'm also wondering, what are some of those specific situations in VR where boundary setting is especially important?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into next. We're going to explore how to handle those tricky social situations in VR, from unwanted flirting to feeling pressured to do things you're not comfortable with.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We were just talking about some really practical stuff for setting boundaries in VR.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's making me think differently about how I handle those situations in real life, too. It's wild how those skills can actually transfer over.
It really is. And it kind of brings us back to something we talked about before, the cost of not setting boundaries. You know, those costs can pop up in our real lives just as much as they do in the virtual world.
Right. We talked about things like feeling resentful and burned out,
Yeah.
and even that feeling of like losing yourself a little bit
Right.
when you're always putting everyone else's needs before your own.
Exactly. And this therapist's guide we've been looking at, it really digs into how those costs can show up in our relationships, our work, even our overall sense of well-being.
It's like this ripple effect, huh?
Yeah.
If you're not taking care of your own needs in one part of your life, it can mess things up everywhere else.
You got it. And one of the most powerful ideas from this guide is that when you respect your boundaries, it's like a form of self-validation.
That's interesting. I've always thought of validation as something that comes from other people,
Hmm.
like getting a compliment or someone's approval.
Mhm.
But how does setting boundaries validate yourself?
Well, think about it this way. When you honor your own needs and you clearly communicate your boundaries, you're basically saying to yourself, my comfort and well-being are important. You're not looking for validation from other people anymore. You're creating it from within.
Whoa, it's a huge shift in perspective. It's
Yeah.
like you're taking back your power and recognizing your own worth.
Exactly. And that kind of internal validation, it's way more powerful and lasting than always needing it from other people. It's like you're building this foundation of self-respect that can handle any pressure that comes from outside.
I'm starting to see how all of this connects. Setting boundaries isn't just about avoiding awkward situations or protecting yourself from negativity. It's about becoming more self-aware,
Yeah.
building self-respect, and ultimately creating more genuine and meaningful connections, both online and offline.
You nailed it. It's about creating a life where you feel confident being your true self without putting your well-being at risk or sacrificing what you need.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gotten a ton of practical tips for navigating VR, but I've also gained a deeper understanding of myself and how important it is to set healthy boundaries in every part of my life.
Absolutely. And remember, it's a journey, not a finish line. It's all about progress, not perfection.
Mm.
Be kind to yourself as you practice these skills and
Mhm.
celebrate those little victories along the way.
So true. And I bet our listeners are already thinking about how they can use these ideas in their own lives.
I hope so, because in the end, boundaries are all about respect. Respect for ourselves and respect for others.
Perfectly said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of boundary setting. Huge thanks to our amazing expert for sharing all their wisdom and insights. And to all our listeners out there, remember, you deserve respect, your needs are valid, and setting boundaries is a way of showing yourself love. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.